The short row technique in knitting sock heels creates a very attractive heel with a diagonal section. It looks especially good if the heel is knitted in a contrasting color. This technique is also called double short rows or German short rows. Here I'm showing a sock with a heel knitted in double short rows. This is what the heel looks like on the right and wrong sides. In this video I will demonstrate how to knit a sock heel like this one. The technique may seem a little tricky to learn and to remember the steps to follow to begin with, so I have broken the video down into 5 easy to follow sections, which using a knitting example will provide you with what you need to knit short row heels like a pro. Let's begin. Just a quick disclaimer, this video tutorial only covers the heel section of a sock. If you would like to learn how to knit socks on double pointed needles, you might find my other videos useful, which I will link in the description under this video. Step 1. Split the stitches for the sock into half. So half of the stitches which we have on our sock will allocate to knitting a heel, and then we will need to split the half of the stitches into 3 equal parts. Firstly, I'm going to join the contrasting yarn to knit my heel. Now I've placed all my heel stitches onto one needle to help me split them into 3 equal parts. You don't have to do this, you can keep your stitches on 2 needles if you prefer. Now if you don't have enough stitches to split them into 3 equal parts, you just need to make sure that the left and right sides are the same, leaving the remainder for the middle part. So for example, I've got 40 stitches in total. I've allocated 14 stitches for the middle section and 13 stitches for the sides. Now I'm going to reallocate my stitches back onto 2 needles, so 20 stitches on each needle, and I'm going to keep the markers in place where I've marked the middle stitches. So half of the middle stitches will be on one needle and half of the middle stitches will be on the other. I'm now ready to create my short rows by forming double stitches. As I'm knitting the heel flat, my first row is on the wrong side. I now need to form a double stitch out of this first purl stitch. So pick up the purl stitch and place it onto the right needle and pull the yarn behind the right needle and then pull it tight. This creates a double stitch. I do not knit this double stitch, but I continue knitting to the end of the row. When I talk about the end of the row here, I mean all the stitches on the 2 needles. Now reverse knitting onto the right side. In this row, I need to create another double stitch out of the first knit stitch. So to do that, I'm going to do the same thing as I did with a purl stitch. It's a little bit different the way double stitch is created, as it's now a knit stitch. So here, pick up the knit stitch, place it onto the right needle, and then pull the yarn in front of the right needle and tighten it to make sure there are no gaps. Then knit to the end of the row. We knit up to the double stitch, so the last stitch at the end of row 2 will be the single knit stitch. The double stitch is left and we turn the knitting onto the wrong side. Row number 3. Whilst holding the double stitch on my right needle, I now need to create another double stitch as it's beginning of the row. I now need to create a new double stitch out of the first purl stitch. So I repeat the same process as in row number 1, and then continue knitting to the end of the row up until the last purl stitch. Now we leave the double stitches on the needles where they are. Can be a little bit tricky because if they're loose, they can slip off, and that means that all your hard work could unravel, because so far I haven't found a good way of saving my double stitches if they've slipped off the needle. It was especially a problem when I started learning this method. I found that if the stitches were a bit too close to the edge of the needle, there was a higher risk of them slipping off. So to prevent that from happening, just make sure once you've used the stitches on the needle, just push the needle a little bit higher so that the stitches stay firmly on there. Another trick is to tighten the yarn when you create the double stitches, so not only to prevent holes from forming, but also to make sure that that the double stitch is sitting on the needles firmly and they're not as easy to slip off. At this point, continue repeating the process of creating double stitches in every row, at the beginning of every row, up until all the stitches on the right hand side before the blue marker have turned into double stitches, and the same on the left hand side. And here is the result of my knitting. So this is what my heel looks like at this point. So all the stitches on the right hand side before the marker and on the left after the marker are now double stitches. In this step, we need to knit 2 rows in the round. So at this point I'm at the top of my heel, so here I just need to knit through the top stitches up to the blue marker. I'm going to leave the blue marker on my right needle because I'll need it for the next step, and then when I get to the double stitches, which are after the marker, I need to knit them in a special way, and just make sure I knit them in the right way so that the stitches end up symmetrical. So here is my double stitch, my first double stitch. I need to pick up the 2 sides of the stitch and then knit through the front loop like so. So just a bit of more closer. So just pick up the 2 stitches, so they look like 2 stitches, one stitch, 2 sides of the stitch, and knit through it, through the front loop. And just continue to the end of all of the double stitches on the left needle. Remember to tighten the yarn after each knit stitch like so, just to make sure that the stitches are forming neatly and evenly. It's most important when you get to the end of the row, when you get to the last couple of double stitches before you transition onto the circular knitting, because there's a bigger risk of bigger kind of opportunity to create a bigger hole in that area. So we just need to make sure that the yarn is always tightened after each double stitch. So here in this area it may seem like there's a big gap between the stitches on the right and left needles, so this we're now transitioning onto the circular knitting. However, if you tighten the yarn tight enough, it should be fine. You should not have a gaping hole there, and just continue knitting in the round up until the next set of double stitches. These double stitches also will need to be knitted in a special way to make sure that they're symmetrical to the ones which we've just knitted. Now I've got to the opposite side of my double stitches, so this is the right hand side, and I need to also knit them. So every double stitch now needs to be knitted in a special way. So the way I'm going to do this, again, remember to tighten the yarn between the stitches where you transition from one stitch to the other, and pick up the double stitch by the back loop and knit through it. So this is the opposite side, so the right hand side needs to be knitted through the back loop like so. And when you get to the blue marker, just slip it onto the right needle and then continue knitting another round of knit stitches. So we've done now one round of knit stitches where we work through our double stitches, and this second round of knitting is just going to be an easy knit in the round. After the two circular rounds, we are now ready to create increasing short rows. So these rows will be worked from the top to the bottom of the stitches on the left and right sides. So I'm just going to knit through the top stitches up until the blue marker on the left hand side. I will not need my marker from now on because I now can see where my first double stitch needs to be. So here is my first stitch after the marker, so I'm just knitted in this row. Then I need to turn the knitting onto the wrong side. Again, we're knitting, creating the short rows, knitting them flat, and here I need to create a double stitch out of this first purl stitch. So again, using the same methodology as in previous step number 2, I'm going to pick up the purl stitch, transfer it onto the right needle, pull the yarn behind the right needle and tighten the yarn. Now I need to purl to the end of the row onto the row on the second needle. Now I've got to the second blue marker, which I no longer need, so I'm gonna just take it off my left needle, pull the first stitch, which now I need to create into a double stitch. So reverse my knitting to the right side. Now this is a knit stitch, so I need to pull the yarn in front of the right needle and then continue knitting to the end of the row. So this is the end of the row on the second needle. At the end of the second row we have a double stitch, so this is a double knit stitch which we knit through the front loop, and then pick up the next knit stitch straight after it. So we knit it and then turn the knitting onto the wrong side, and on this wrong side we pick up that first stitch, which is now a purl stitch, and again turn it into a double stitch and then continue knitting to the end of the row. At the end of the purl row, the last stitch is a double stitch now again, and we just need to purl it through the back loop. So we just pick up the back loop and then purl the stitch through the back loop. So tighten the yarn and release both sides of the double stitch, and then pick up the next purl stitch, purl it, and then turn the knitting onto the right side. Then again create a double stitch out of the first knit stitch, and then knit to the end of the row, knit to the last double stitch, which needs to be worked through the front loop, then pick up the next knit stitch, knit it, turn the knitting over to the wrong side, create a double stitch out of the first purl stitch, and so on so forth until you work through all of the stitches on the right and left needles. Also would like to remind you that when we work the double stitches on the wrong side, so these are the double purl stitches, we need to knit them as a purl stitch through the back loop. So we pick up two sides of the purl stitch through the back loop and pull through it. I have worked through all of my stitches now, and I got to the last double stitch on my left needle, which I'm going to knit through the front loop, and now rejoin my knitting in the round. And again, when you transition to the knitting in the round, make sure you tighten the yarn between the needles so that there are no gaps created between them.